hello, good evening, and welcome to Teatro Latea's Latea Remoto Tertulia. Tonight with us, joining us is Elisabeth Stevens, also known as Liz. And Liz, how are you? Good evening.
I'm well, Miguel. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a privilege for me, and it's going to be a pleasure, I think, for all. You were here not so long ago shooting an segment for Quarantine Sings, and it was a real joy to listen to the music, to listen to you all sing. Anyway, before we go,
to be in the theater also. Your space is beautiful. The staff was amazing. We had absolutely the time of our lives with you all that day.
Well, hopefully we'll keep having the time of our lives with you and all those singers. Before I have a few questions, and I really want to hear you talk about a range of different issues about your career and about Quarantine Sing and about music. But before, I want to give our guests a very brief idea. I mean, our guest tonight is an extraordinary soprano. She is the founder and principal teaching artist at Studio LIS Voice in New York City. Her performance credits are vast, so I'm not going to go into the whole, CV. But she has been at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia, Teatro Verdi di Sassari, the Metropolitan Opera, and other world stages throughout, a lot of places: Italy, France, China, as well as Austria, and all over the United States. We'll get into more specifics as we talk, but I wanted to start, since we met Liz in the context of Quarantine Sing at Teatro Latea, to talk to us a little bit about Studio LIS Voice program. What is that, Liz?
Thank you. Studio LIS is my brainchild. I started Studio LIS in 2015, partly as my voice studio. But actually, I guess I started my voice studio sooner, but it became Studio LIS in 2015. And the idea of Studio LIS is to bring not only the technical and the artistic training, but also some life skills and business skills for the singers that you typically don't learn when you're in conservatory or music school programs. So we started out with some master classes with some financial experts and things like that. And now we've grown into more of a full service platform where we also do some life coaching and things like that. So it's basically a full, comprehensive, total artist development program. Different than, I think, the other things that are on the market, which tend to focus on how to become the professional artist, but then don't tell you what to do once you become that professional artist.
So there's like some life coaching in the mix.
It's life coaching, it's self-actualization. It's also learning about how the business works, learning about marketing, how to brand yourself as an artist, how to choose who you are in the industry. Because I think that's something that singers don't realize. They have the power to choose who they are within the context of developing the career. We've gone through kind of a weird time as artists in the opera industry where it has felt like everyone has a say in the process except the singers.
Right.
And so now I think things are maybe starting to shift a little bit, but in the process, singers sort of lose, I think, the identity of the original person. And so Studio LIS helps people to kind of bring back that original you and put it into your artistry in a way that makes you stand out as an individual, while also figuring out, okay, in addition to being a singer, who am I? What do I want for my life?
And do you work with people that are not singers, just on the outside chance? Because we're talking about something a little bit broader for the singer. So is there a chance of non-singers to somehow feel their way through the Studio LIS program, or not?
I do work with people who aren't singers, but not as a part of Studio LIS. I work with non-singers through personal one-on-one coaching, and also through a program that I sometimes coach with called Momentum Education here in the city. So But yeah, I do some coaching as well outside of Studio LIS, but not within Studio LIS.
Of course,
Yeah.
I get it. And what about the encouragement? I mean, so this is an encouraging platform, you know, that encompasses more than singing, even though that seems to be the anchor, as you've just said. So have you received some encouragement in terms of this platform that you've created and sort of being working on? Who has encouraged you in that aspect of your career?
Yeah, it's been really beautiful to watch how the industry sort of has taken into it, especially part of what we do is we bring people into the space who can potentially influence the outcomes for the singers. We bring people into the space who are experts in the industry. They know what's working. They know how these singers can best maximize their talent. So they bring their opinions into the space, but it's been really beautiful myself to get from those same people how different and unique the program is. So I think that's one major encouragement. And then, are you talking about before the career, or you're talking about in the list, right?
About this program, and I'm getting that some of the guest speakers are like they're giving you encouragement and perhaps, yeah.
No, there's so much support. I just had a conversation recently with Ana de Archuleta. She's one of the artist managers who's been into the space a few times. And she was just so brilliantly supportive in the conversation, saying how very unique what we're doing is. You know, I think her words were, "This is nothing like anything anybody else is doing in the industry right now." You know, and I think that encourages me, just seeing how receptive people have been to enter the space. When they come into the space, they feel something different. They feel a sense of community and cohesiveness that I think is very unique to our space not only in the music, not only in the opera industry, but in the entertainment industry in general. We're just really fostering, as much as we're fostering the individual, we're fostering the community. And we've gotten a lot of great support from that. Similarly, a guy from Uzan International Artists, Aaron Sanko, came into our space. He said some very similar things about how, you know, just what the community is and what the intention behind it is, having the singers to do goal setting as opposed to just coming in and like, this is what you're going to do. You know, they get to have a say in what they're going to do with their time, with their artistry, with their development. And people are really, really encouraging around that.
Well, you know, and then there's 2020. I mean, I remember talking to you a little bit after your show, and basically, I remember you telling me you came down with COVID, and still, in spite of that trauma, which most of the world is still going through, and we don't know what to make out of it here, if we're really out or what, but you managed to create this remarkable quarantine sing aspect of, you know, of the Studio LIS Voice program. And you published your first book. I mean, you know, Perfect Practice.
My goodness.
A journal for singers. Everybody look it up. Perfect Practice, a journal for singers. So talk to us a little bit about, because the title says it all, right? Quarantine Sings. So you got COVID, you weren't quarantined, you came up with this, or you were coming up with this to sort of alleviate the pain, and then all of a sudden you come up with COVID. What's the chronology for you?
It was the first one. I had COVID right at the beginning of the pandemic. In March is when I came down with it. I remember I taught my final in-person voice lesson. I think it was March 14th, whatever the Saturday was of that week. I taught my last, because I remember it so well, because gradually through the week, fewer and fewer people were on the subway, fewer and fewer people were in the stores, and I was still out like nothing's going on, you know? And so I was aware of it, but you know what, Miguel, I'm a news junkie, but in 2020, at the beginning of the year, because of the elections, I decided to go on a news fast for the year 2020 because I didn't want to be overcome. So I was a little bit oblivious to what was happening around me at the time. And I knew something was going on. I knew there was this kind of illness going around. It had been in China, now it's here. So I was like, okay, they're saying quarantine. So I taught my last lesson. Then I went to my own lesson. I went to a rehearsal, actually, not a lesson. I went to a rehearsal with a pianist, Chris Cooley, who had written some songs on poetry that I wrote. And we were rehearsing for a concert that we were going to produce in the spring. Because at this point, nobody's really 100% convinced that we're going to be on quarantine for, nobody knows how long we're going to be on quarantine. But we're pretty convinced that it'll be like a month at home and then we'll get back to business as usual still. Anyway, I taught my last lesson. I went home. I came here and I, was like, okay, well, I'll just relax at home for a little while. By Tuesday, I was in bed and I could not move. I was so exhausted. My body was aching. I felt like I had a really bad sinus infection. So I called the doctor. Of course, they wouldn't see me because I had symptoms. So I had this terrible telehealth appointment. They put me on antibiotics for the sinus infection that I didn't have. And then I stayed in bed for about 2 or 3 more weeks until my housemate Laura came home from Bali. She had been in Bali for and she gave me this herbal concoction because she's an herbalist. So she gave me this great tea. She's like, drink this for 24 hours straight. And I'm just drinking this tea. And finally, I come out of this sort of stupor that I had been in for like 2.5 weeks at home by myself. And so I just came out of it. I felt 10 times better. And I was reading at the time a book I had already read once, but I was rereading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a book about spiritual awakening. And I was also in the beginning of 2020 doing a lot of journaling and a lot of soul searching. And as I started to come out of my stupor, I started to, just reach out and see how my singers were doing, because I knew that the time was suddenly by then I knew that this time was about to go on longer than anybody had imagined. I already knew that, like, by the beginning of April of 2020. And I said to my roommate, I think she said something like, well, hopefully we'll be back to normal this summer. I said, no, there's no possible way we're going to be back to normal this summer with all these people doubting. And, it's spreading like wildfire here in New York at that point.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way we're going to be back to normal until at least, I actually called it. I said September 2021.
Wow.
That's what I called. Sometimes I have a very weird premonition type of thing going on, but I did say that. Anyway, so I started checking in with my singers and they just seemed so in need of something to ground them, and I had been writing a lot, and I wrote this sort of missive about awakening and rising. It actually ended up in one of the songs that Chris wrote. And I said, people need calm. People need peace right now. That's what I was getting from the singers. They needed a space where they could come, be grounded, and have peace. And so when I first wrote the program for Quarantine Sing, the curriculum, I wrote it as a program for singers to create a calm mind, a peaceful spirit, and a renewed energy and commitment for the voice and career through the pandemic and beyond. And that's still the motto of Quarantine Sing, which I don't know how much longer it's going to be called Quarantine Sing.
Well, I would like to go.
Motto of the program.
I would like to, in that context, thank you, because that puts it, it's almost like Coleridge about the dream of Kubla Khan, and then somebody knocked at the door and he forgets the rest of the poem. So you come out of that delirium of the COVID delirium, you have the vision for how long this will start. you bring your spirit of service, of service to the artistic community that you inhabit. And, what was your challenge? Because we had a few of them over them here, because like you, we continued, we had that realization of community, of how we bring ourselves together. And how do performers like yourself in the music, el bel canto, the opera singers, how did you guys compensate for the lack of instantaneous feedback that the audience brings? Because all this time, those of us that have strived, made the effort, gone the way of film, gone the way of recording, gone the way of quarantine sing, have still experimented a loss in spite of the gains, the resilience. How did you guys justify that remarkable absence of?
I don't think there's really a justification or a compensation for it. I think what happens for me is that, and we have there's a module that I taught in the holiday session called Gatekeepers. And Gatekeepers is about being the gatekeeper of your own dreams and desires, and like nothing standing between you and it except you, ideally. And it's a GAATE, and it stands for gratitude, acceptance, affirmation, time, and E is for, it's not excellence. I always want to say excellence. It might be excellence. Anyway, this was the holiday session, so forgive me. I don't remember the gatekeepers. Anyway, the A that's the most important for me in that is the acceptance. And so here, what we've been talking about is accepting the situation as it is. We can't do anything about the fact that there's no live audience. Right. So how do we get the absolute most out of the moment, knowing that our audience is with us, our audience is with us. And it's our responsibility as artists to feed them. It's not their responsibility to feed us with their applause and their encouragement. It's our responsibility to feed them with our artistry, with our emotional connection. And so we have to learn how to bring that through this other way of performing. So that's one piece, is just simply accepting that this is what it is. And then once you accept that this is how something is, then you can move within that and make the most of it, The other thing, I think that has a few things. There's another thing that's sort of more esoteric, and then a very practical thing that we've done. The other sort of the esoteric spiritual kind of thing is around, for me, it's the knowledge that actually my family can watch me perform now, whereas before they couldn't come to things. Like if I was in Italy, my family couldn't be there. Now it's almost, I feel like we've switched into a space where it will be par for the course that there's also a live stream option for performances, and that sometimes it won't have also a cost attached to it for our families, or even if it does, it's nominal compared to.
It's not going to be extraordinary, right? No, right. You're so right. Right. You're so right. Yeah.
So there's that. Then the practical thing that we've done to compensate was through our production partner. They had that social media platform, right? And so
is that Musée? The Musée?
Yes.
Yeah,
Musée. Yeah. So Musée has that social media platform. So we had Barry, who you met. He was our stage director. But before we came to Latea, he would sit in the audience and just be the social media contact. And he would give us messages from the audience during the performances, what are they saying? And then afterwards, we would host these sort of receptions, these virtual Zoom champagne toasts receptions, where the audience can still be with you. Like and it took us a couple of iterations to catch on to that part, that you can still bring the audience in. You're just not going to have them there with you. And so, I think it's also a very good exercise for performing artists to learn how to bring it without the audience there. Because then if you can bring it like that without the audience, imagine what you can do when the audience is actually there.
Right. Like it just exponential,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about quarantine sing, and I can see, with what you're telling, something that I'm also feeling, that the quarantine is over, but some of the assets that you developed and that you have been working with during quarantine sing are going to stay with us and complement the live experience as we venture out live. But what about the book? Were you working on your book before the pandemic, or was this? Okay. So talk to me about the book.
Yeah.
Is it only about singing technique, or is it also broader in scope as the program?
It's definitely, the book is definitely for singers. I was working on the book before the pandemic. I started working on the book 2019, around March of 2019.
Okay.
I was in Pittsburgh at the time. Long story, but essentially, like I was saying, with Studio LIS, it's been my vision to bring singers resources that empower them beyond the voice studio. And so I was thinking about, what is a resource that is needed in our industry that people that I can bring, that's not necessarily people coming to me for a program, something that's not as expensive as them coming to me for a program, for example, but something that they can kind of get a taste of what my perspective is. The practice journal came about for many reasons. I have a lot of students who have gone through programs where they have as high as master's degrees. I have a lot of students who have never gone to any programs. They've just, been hobbyist sort of singers, and they don't have the first clue about how to start learning new music or practicing to improve the vocal quality. And I then have some students who fall somewhere in between those categories, where maybe they've done their undergrad and not yet their master's. Most opera singers have a master's degree, which is something that is probably not as well known, but a lot of us have to go on to get a master's degree just because of the level of technical and language study and everything that's required. So I have a lot of students who are sort of in that in-between transition period who find me on their way to grad school. So what I've learned is that not everybody is getting the same type of information in their programs, whether it's undergrad or grad school. Some people have finished grad school and still don't know how to learn new music, like how to learn it quickly, how to learn it in a way that you can learn it today, sing it from memory tomorrow in a foreign language, and so, right. It's not easy. And then along the way, like, I would meet singers who say they don't like to practice. They don't know what practice is about. Anyway, long story short, I created it because I felt like people need to understand how to practice singing, how to develop the technique and the musculature and the brain power, the brain function, because it's a different way that your brain has to operate to learn this stuff versus to learn pretty much most other musical or theatrical types of performances, because you'll usually work in one medium where you're working, not one medium, but you're working here with spoken text. You're working here with a combination of spoken text and music, but it's all American popular style music or Broadway style music. And it's not the same kind of thing that you need to do to, again, learn music in a foreign language and then have it tell a story and mean something, even if you don't know the language.
Yeah, so the book is about singing technique, but it goes around the singing technique to also grapple with practical issues, even though they are about the singing practical issues that belong to the singing technique
Precisely.
realm. Yeah.
I would say it's not even about the technique.
Oh, okay.
It's not even about like, how do you sing? It's
Okay.
literally about how do you practice? And it provides a space for people to record their practice habits and also to analyze their practice habits, like to make notes of what questions they have for their teachers and what, you know, put their translations in. And there's some anatomy diagrams for how to understand what your teacher's talking about when they're giving you these different technical things. And there's like, there's a missive on goal setting and all different kinds of things, but it's more about how to develop a good practice life so that you can become the kind of artist you want to be.
Do you feel that your book, if you know, might end up perhaps being on the curriculum? Like, it just sounds like a great thing to go from undergrad to that master's phase.
Yeah.
And I would imagine if something like that were to be picked up by a few choice master's departments in singing, that could really make a difference in any author's life and artist's life. Did you have any prospects for that sort of marketing, for lack of a better word? You know,
that is absolutely the marketing plan. Like, we are definitely reaching out to colleges and universities and asking people to bring it on, and liaisoning with voice teachers of private studios as well, and asking them to basically require their students to use it, you know, because it is a curriculum thing. And we have the pandemic kind of actually made it a little bit less appealing, because I think if it had been, which we're also developing an app for it, and I think if it had been the app during the pandemic, we would have had no problems getting people to commit with it. But with the teachers not even being on campus, it's hard for them to require their singers to keep a journal that they can't even then reference and check for themselves that the singer is taking it. But we did have a few professors request it and ask for their students to be on it. We offer a student discount when the students order. A good friend of mine, Laquita Mitchell, teaches at Brooklyn College, and she has her whole studio using it there. And we have we have some good prospects out there. So you hit it right on the head, Miguel, unsurprisingly.
Good. Well, I good luck with that, because I can imagine the difference it could make, not just in you know, for your platform, but also in the lives of these young practitioners, or, you know, up and coming. So, but now you got me curious, since it's not really about singing as such. I want 2 or 3 things. I want to pick your brains about 2 or 3 things, questions I have about singing. So what would be as a visual artist, I draw, I paint, whatever. So what's the hardest thing for you about singing? Because if they ask me that about art, I imagine different practitioners will find different challenges on the craft itself, on drawing and or painting. So what is it to you, Liz Stevens? What's the most challenging part of singing, the actual act of singing? What's your?
I think that's such a great question. I think, of course, there's like a stack of things, but I think if I had to pick out one specific thing, I would say the most challenging thing that all singers deal with is imitation. And in the sense that, especially in our world, we have access, and this is like across genres, not even just with opera, classical, but with all singers. In our world, we have so much recording and we have so much sound information in our ears. And so when we then go to make our sounds, most people who start singing, they're trying to make sounds that they've heard before. And your voice, what's going to make your voice really special is when you identify what makes your sound most unique. So if you start out with the intention of imitating the sounds that you're familiar with, then you already kind of caught yourself up in like a trap, because you have to now try to train your ears to stop listening and simply produce sound and trust that your voice is the sound that people actually want to hear out of your person, you know?
What about a transition? Because, imitation is also how you learn. You learn by imitating, or at least it seems to be one of the routes for those that are not totally born with the genius to just like come out with their own, which some people do. But I think most people imitate. And so what would be, how do you cut that? Let's say you have an apparatus and it comes to you that, wow, I can sing because I imitated Sinatra or whatever, Maria Callas or whatever. And then how do you negotiate that break from?
It's so hard. I think it's really hard. I think there are a few different like specific techniques that you can use.
Well, talk to me about, I want to know about you. Who are you singing like when you first get this thing and you realize I have a voice, or I've been singing all my life and so who was the model and how did you kill the model or sublimate the model?
Okay, so I had a few models. Number one, I grew up in not a non-classical home. We had classical music in the home, but the bread and butter of my musical education as a child was definitely R&B, classic R&B, right? And my dad is actually really big into rock and jazz. So R&B, rock, jazz, those were the things that I grew up on. And I would definitely say my personal model that I first sought to really imitate was without a doubt Whitney Houston. Without a doubt, I sang every single Whitney Houston song known to man as a child, At some point, I think in high school, I started to branch out more into Broadway because I went to a high school where Broadway was very big. I don't know if I ever really completely broke the habit of imitation until I was already kind of in my own career. Because then when I started to learn about opera, it became Leontine Price and Jesse Norman. Those were the two people who I most admired and wanted to emulate in my artistry. A little bit of Renee Fleming and actually a lot of Joan Sutherland Joan Sutherland is a person who I really sought to imitate. I just love the way she could do all of these acrobatic things with her voice. And so I think it was when I was working with my voice teacher, Sharon Sweet, that she started to sort of pull the real voice out of me, and she was a consummate artist, and she started to really, she had this one exercise where she would make me do this, but I think I'm not sure. It's such a hard question. I think it was when I was already kind of out there singing, when I was falling on my face in auditions and realized that the reason I was falling on my face is because I wasn't being authentic. And I was trying to do something instead of just simply going and lending my voice, I think that's when I probably started to really get into away from imitating. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I think it's something that all artists across all genres grapple with. And what I really appreciate from your analysis is the fact that, again, possibly in all genres today, the wealth of information and models at your fingertips can be empowering, but it's also crushing.
Right.
Because then, it's almost like you can't envision adding anything to that canon, whether it be R&B or classical, whether it be rock and roll or salsa, whether it's whatever. So I think all artists today are facing that conundrum. Young artists, emerging artists, are facing that conundrum. But going forward with singing, I'm also fascinated, since we got into the singing thing, with the enormous richness in the trajectory of the human voice, right? Like kid's voice, the young adult's voice, the mature person's voice, the later maturity, and then old age. I mean, the voice is just this record of experience. You hear it in the voice, like, wow, a lot of experience, no experience, resentment, love, all these things come through. So what happens? What happens as we mature? What have you experienced, and also what have you seen? Because you're still in your early career, I imagine. Like what happens then with older singers, like people like Plácido Domingo, regarding roles? How do you envision that in your future and any singer's future?
First of all, I love what you just said about the voice being a record of human experience. That is so beautiful and accurate. It's funny. There's a scientific part of me that wants to answer the question in a scientific way, right?
Okay.
Where our voices literally physically change because of our muscular and the ossification of our cartilage and things like that. And so the voice literally changes. A lot of women, our voices will go lower as we get older because we don't have the same.
Oh my God, Celia Cruz. I'm a big fan of Celia Cruz, and Celia with La Sonora when she was still in Cuba, Celia when she was with Puerto Ricans here in New York, and then Celia when she was at the later end of their career. Her voice had this gravitas, it got so deep. Yes. It sounded like a man's voice, a beautiful man's voice in her older age, but it was a different voice. It was a different voice.
And that comes from both hormonal and physical changes, but also the thing that you talked about, which is life experience, where she's using her voice so much, and not always necessarily in the technically quote unquote correct way. And so that use also sort of adds that gravitas that you're talking about. And then that experience, absolutely. There's, I think, I love that you also brought up Plácido Domingo, because he's a person who has had so many iterations of himself as an artist, right? We've known him for so long as this incredible tenor, and then he starts conducting, and eventually he starts singing baritone repertoire instead of tenor repertoire because he's getting older and those high notes don't sound like they did, when he was a young guy. And so now he's singing baritone rep, but he's also telling a different story for his life, I think. I don't know, I don't know him personally to say what he's telling, but he's telling a different story of his life. And I think that's what happens for all of us. Once you get beyond the physical, the science stuff that literally changes your voice, there becomes a different story that we want to tell. And I think as I look at myself right now, I'm actually in the process of sort of getting back into performing after a sort of long hiatus, which was brought about by some medical things that I literally took a break from the stage. And now I'm sort of like getting back on, and it's like, oh, this feels kind of weird in the first place. Like, you forget how different it is to actually put your voice out there for people to receive and judge and have opinions about, whether they're good opinions or bad opinions. People will have opinions about it. And so now I'm in that process and deciding, well, who am I, as an artist, and what am I about to say here? What am I about to say?
Well, I wanted now to really segue into by the way, we should make a cut. I'm going to ask Frank Fantini to cut something from Quarantine Sing here at Latea. Play it, Frank.
Udiste come albeggi la scuri al figlio ed alla madre il rogo. uso forse quel poter che pieno in me trasmise il prence, a tal mi traggi, donna per me funesta. O bella e mai, ripreso castellor di lei contezza non ebbi, e furo indarno tante ricerche, tante, a dove sei crudele.
A te davanti,
Fa voce che tu donna
il vedi,
e venisti,
e io già preso l'ora estrema, e tu lo chiedi,
osar potresti.
si peresa, pietà, mamma,
Trillini,
pietà,
trillini, io del rival sentir pietà.
amate non mi attiri,
Io del rival sentir pietà.
amate non mi attiri, spiriti,
E sol vendetta mio nome, vendetta e sol mio nome, vendetta e sol mio nome. Va, 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 va.
Mira di te lacrime, spargo il tuo vero rio, non basti il pianto fine a me, che bevi il sangue mio. Svenami, ti bevi il sangue mio. Calpesta il mio cadavere, posato in tuo volto.
Ah, dell'indegno rendere, vorrei peggior la sorte, fra mille atroci spasimi, centuplicar suo amore.
Svenami,
Più l'ami è più terribile, divampaia un tuo furor. Più l'ami è più terribile, divampa.
siete voi donne o no? E per questo dovete far da donne, cioè tratta l'amore un bagatelle, le occasioni ville non negliger giammai, cangiar a tempo circostanti, coquetizzar con grazia, prevenir la disgrazia si comune a chi si fida in uomo, mangiar il fico e non gettare il pomo. Che diavolo, sai cosa falle tu se n'hai voglia? Io ce le faccio, ma vorrei che anche voi, per gloria del bel sesso, faceste un po' lo stesso. Per esempio, i vostri ganimedi sono andati alla guerra, infinché tornano fatte a militare, reclutate. Il cielo ce ne guardi, e che siamo in terra e non in cielo, fidatevi a mio zello, già che questi forestieri voi daranno, lasciatevi adorar, son ricchi, belli, nubili, generosi, come Feria facevo e Don Alfonso, abbian coraggio di morire per voi. Questi son merti che sprezzar non si denno, da giovani quel voi, belle galanti, che pon star senza amor, no senza amanti. Par che ci trovi in gusto, per Bacco ci faresti far delle belle cose. Credi tu che vogliamo favola diventar degli oziosi? Ai nostri cari sposi, credi tu che vogliamo dar dal tormento? E chi dice che abbiate a far loro contorto? Non ti pare che sia torto bastante, che sia facessi che trattiamo costor. Anche per questo c'è in mezzo sicurissimo. Io voglio sparger fama che vengano da me. E fai che creda? Oh, filla, non è forse immerto una cameriera da per 2 cici svegli. Vi me fittotevi, no, son troppo audaci queste tuoi forestieri. Non è per la baldanza fin di chieder de voci. Che disgrazia! Io posso assicurarvi che le cose che ho fatto furono effetti del tossico compreso, convulsioni, deliri, follie, vaneggiamenti, ma vedrete come son discreti.
So I wanted to also, that now that we've seen Quarantine sing, I wanted to go back to you, to your career as a soprano. And I wanted to start with that moment. I mean, you already told us something about your influences in your household, the music, you know, the Whitney Houston thing, I think was very illuminating, and how, you know, you can transition. But I want to know, when did you have that awareness, or when did people let you know, or that you, oh, I got a gifted voice. My voice is above and beyond, and, you know, with all humility and whatever. But when you think, I got a gift, something special, and I'm going to start working on this gift for livelihood, for everything, you know, for the whole package. When did that happen for you?
I think, it's one of those things I hesitate to say, but I say it. I think that I was born knowing that I was a singer.
Okay.
But there was a moment when I realized that I could become a professional, right? I wanted to become a professional. In high school, I wanted to be a singer, and I used to sing at all of the big events. I was always a soloist for our choir concerts. I sang the national anthem at our football games. I was the one that was always singing, and I wanted to do it, but I had a lot of fear around it. And I didn't have a lot of encouragement in that particular community, because a few things. Number one, I was one of the only Black people in the entire community, period. Wow. Our family was like one of 3 Black families in the whole school system. So that was one thing. And I think that was a source of discouragement for me in that community. Although, like I said, there were ways in which they certainly raised me up and did encourage me, but as far as actually pursuing a career as a singer, it wasn't something you really did in that community either. So that was another thing. My parents always encouraged me to be whoever I am. They weren't really particularly committed to who I would become, like what I would do with my life. I was always very drawn to languages. So I studied like international sciences or political science, international politics and business and stuff like that when I was in high school again. And when I went to college, I went to Bucknell University. I went to college and I went as an—
You majored in international relations. I read.
That's exactly how I started. I started as an IR major. And I was in the international residential college. We had a residential college for international studies, and I lived in the house of international studies, or in the dorm for international studies. Okay. I knew that I wanted to sing. So I went and auditioned for the choir at the beginning of my freshman year when they had the choir auditions, and I didn't know how to read music. And I didn't know how to control my voice and blend. And so when I did the audition, the choir instructor said, "You have an amazing voice. I can hear it, but I can't take you into the choir because your voice won't mix with the choir and you don't have the skills." He was super honest with me. "You don't have the skills that the other singers will have and are required to have." He said, "But I want you to take voice lessons because I think you have something really amazing." And I said, okay, I wanted to take voice lessons, but I heard it was really hard. He said, I'm going to put you on the list. His name is Bill Payne. I love Bill Payne. And he said, I'm going to put you on the list of people who are qualified and eligible for voice lessons. So go to the registrar's office and enroll. So I did that. And I ended up studying with this wonderful woman named Susan Beckley. About halfway through the semester, one day in my voice lesson, the first semester, Susan says, Lis, you're an opera singer.
Because that was my next question, regardless of what she said, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. When was the moment that you heard opera, other than this admonition? I'm getting this chronology right. And now in college, as happens to so many of us that get the privilege of going to college, some things start clicking in place. She's telling you, you got the opera chops, girl, go for that. But before that, was there any point in time where you had, even if it's in the back of your mind, sort of click, one of those things that you can't articulate, that you really don't know how to act on, but had you had any prior exposure to opera where something clicked for you, or no?
I would say yes to that. In the sense, now it's interesting because just recently, one of my high school teachers told me that I told her I wanted to be an opera singer. And I was like, really? I don't remember saying that at all. I don't remember having that inkling at that time. I do remember as a little girl on Saturday afternoons, my mom would listen to the opera broadcasts, because they would have these opera broadcasts even back then. Maybe it wasn't Saturday afternoons then. I don't know what day of the week it was. It might have been Thursday night for all I know. But my mom would listen to the opera sometimes. And I do remember laying on the floor in the living room, listening to opera and being very intrigued by it. And sort of like intensely entranced by it at the time. That's my earliest memory. And I had to be less than 10 at the time. I had to be less than 10.
So there was that subliminal, or however you want to call it, like oral impression that's working. So back to this lady at your college, the professor, the woman, whoever that told you, you are an opera singer. What transpired afterwards? How did then it all come to a head?
So then she started to give me more classical things. Before, we had been mostly doing sacred music. And so she started to give me some arias. She gave me an aria called A Mio Cor. And I loved it. And then I started to listen. I guess I was already aware of the opera by then, and I listened to opera in high school for sure. Like, it was not like completely foreign, but that was the time when I started to actually consume it intentionally. That was the time when I started to become familiar with Leontine Price and Kathleen Battle and Jessie Norman and other Black women who made careers as opera singers, and that, oh, this is something that actually I
can aspire to, maybe.
Right.
But yeah.
Absolutely. And I think even back then, not as much now, but even back then, as a more plus size woman, it also seemed like something that was more aspirational than being a pop diva, for example, because back then there was no such thing as a chubby pop singer, right? Like, it was like there was no such thing.
So in a way, this was empowering, empowering that the divas of opera, the body type is flattering to you. It's cool. Like, all right.
Exactly. At the time, not as much anymore. Now it's a whole other story. But but at the time in the 90s, that was the case. Yeah.
Wow.
For sure.
Well, then, and then, to give short shrift now to education, because I don't want to stay there all of our talk, but then you attended Westminster Choir College at Rider University, right? That's where you pursued your master's.
That's correct.
Where is this?
Princeton, it's okay. So Westminster used to be in Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
That's where it was when I was there. They moved recently the campus onto the campus at Rider, which is in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, about maybe 5 or 6 miles down the road.
Close.
But very close. Yeah. But it's in Princeton, New Jersey.
And this is now opera all the way, and boom.
By then it's opera all the way. By the time I finished college, I had switched my major to music. I was a part of the opera company. I was in all the choirs. I had actually started my own gospel choir on campus, but I knew by the time I was leaving school that it was opera for me, for sure. And it's interesting you say, when did I realize I had an extraordinary instrument? I still didn't know at that time. I still
At the masters, even at the masters, like
even,
when you
even when I was pursuing my master's, I still was not clear at what my instrument was. I don't think I really, in the same way that I didn't learn to embrace my voice, I don't think I really knew that until I was already out there and hearing other singers who were also at my same level and had like sort of gone to the apex, you know, and understanding like, oh, I'm one of these people.
Well, those are nice realizations. That must have, yeah. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Still even now, I'm like, am I one of those people? I don't know, you know. But
let's ask you then, you know, when you're thinking if you're one of those people, probably the music that you sing makes that crystal clear. I'm sure certain compositions, certain areas, certain things you have expressed somewhere that the music written between 1850 and 1950, that some of your personal favorites are in that range. That's like a century. That's a century of music. Can you share with us some of those things where that the instrument just shines because there is affective, you're close to them in some way?
Absolutely. I mean, anything Verdi is the first thing that I would say. Verdi is like my absolute favorite composer.
Why Verdi for you?
I think number one, I think it suits my instrument. I think it like is really just, this music is made for a voice like mine to sing, period. The way that he sets the text, he's very intentional with the language and the libretto, and just like, he has a deep connection with literature, which I also have a deep connection with literature. And it's just the way that he sets the voice to sort of move and be extremely flexible. It's very difficult music to sing. Not everyone can sing it, although, you know, lots of people are singing it now. But it's very difficult music to sing, and you have to have a kind of capacity in the upper register and the lower register. You have to be able to go from the bottom to the top and back down and have total control over the instrument the whole time. And as a person who really loves the technique of it, I love that about Verdi. He also manages to really capture the drama in it. And I think, and he's very melodic in his writing, whereas some other composers will capture the drama, but there's no melody to catch on to, you know? But with Verdi, there's always some gorgeous melody to sing.
What's your favorite Verdi? What's a favorite melody for you?
Definitely, my favorite melody.
Or close to. I mean, you know, those questions, you know, something
I would say all of Aida.
Okay,
and particularly the aria O Patria Mia is an absolute favorite. Oh, so gorgeous. And then you have the piano high C at the end. Oh, beautiful, beautiful stuff there. He has some, of course, I love stuff I can't sing, like Gilda and Rigoletto. I would never sing that, but I absolutely love all of Gilda's music.
Okay.
Especially her aria Caro Nome, I think is really gorgeous. But I love the greatest hits. People sometimes are like, yeah, but listen, it's beautiful stuff. There's a reason it's a great hit. It's because it appeals to the human spirit. You know, another one I love is Puccini. Puccini wrote amazingly heart-wrenching music. You know, you hear something by Puccini, and a lot of people don't even realize that a lot of their favorite opera melodies are Puccini. You know, like that song, O mio babbino caro, O mio babbino caro. Everybody knows that aria when they hear it, and they don't even know it's Puccini. Nessun dorma, that's Puccini, you know. I love these very classic things. So
Wow. Well, and now I'm getting really excited because we happen to know, I hope everybody now knows and that everybody's attentive to it, that you have a concert on June 26th. So I want you to talk to us a little bit about what you're going to be singing, where are you going to be at, and how can we get to see you, to listen to you and see you on that date? What's going on June 26th?
Good question. We will have all of the details shareable, and you'll be able to purchase your tickets by Tuesday of this coming week.
Excellent.
So we are, but it's basically, the concert is it's sort of, and it's sort of migrated a few times as to what it is, but it's basically me just sharing my voice. I will sing some Verdi. I will sing, I'll sing some beautiful songs by Franz Schubert, which are sort of really cool pieces. We have some spirituals. I'll be singing some spirituals, some African-American spirituals, which I actually haven't included in a concert in a while. And I'll also be reprising the poetry, or the songs written on the poetry that I wrote by my friend Chris Cooley. I mentioned that earlier. So it'll be a nice little hodgepodge. I think I had a vision for this concert a while ago that was a lot more complicated. Mm-hmm. But with everything Quarantine Sing going on, I just have to really scale it down.
Not just you, everybody. I think it's just like we're coming back into the fray. Yes. So I think everybody's got to like dip their feet in the water again. Absolutely. So that we get the level back on, let's say by spring 22 or something like that.
That's exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly it.
Cool.
So we are, yeah. So we're looking forward to it. I'm like a little bit, I don't know why I'm feeling nervous to even just talk about it, but I am.
Well, so we're not going to make you any more nervous. Everybody just keep looking out for Liz Stevens, and there's something coming on the 26th. Yeah. So as a fellow artist, I don't want to press you on that. I'm very superstitious about that kind of stuff. So let's move on. And I want to finish. When we start talking some of these tertulias, and especially this tertulia, the time just evaporates. You talk, boom, bam. So we have a little time, but not as much as we would like. And I want to, go on. I want to finish, this has been a time of great turbulence, if you will, not that it ever gone away in terms of diversity on our role as Latinos, African Americans, Asians, everybody's role in the matrix, and especially in the cultural matrix, and, who signifies what to whom and this and that. And I want to just, talk about that in the context of the opera. Because we know that come September 27th, talk about like reopening and this and that, there's going to be a premiere at the Met of Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones.
That's right.
And that's the first opera by an African-American composer to be performed at the Met. I could be wrong. Maybe there's been
You're absolutely right.
But so that to me, and the libretto is by Cassie Lemons, it's based on a memoir by Charles M. Blow from the New York Times, writer, columnist. So that's exciting. So then things are changing, so what do you think? What do you think about that? What's your feeling on the zeitgeist and what's going on, and on this particular opening at the Met?
Yeah. So let's start with the zeitgeist. I think the time I told you I was reading that book about spiritual awakening at the time that everything happened. And I think that this time has been a time of massive, necessary awakening around many things, around how we live in our families, around how we work, around our relationships with work and family, around money, around all kinds of things. And the awakening, the reckoning that our country has been going through around race is so long overdue. And as far as the opera industry is concerned, I think this has been the only way that we could possibly see the shift that's taking place right now, is for something like what we've been through over this last year to have taken place.
A shock unlike no other shock.
Total shock to the system. Everything shut down, nothing to do but look at what's actually happening. And
at ourselves.
Exactly. Outward and inward. Nothing to do but look. And so that inward looking in the opera industry has been taking place. There's been so much, there's been a lot of conversation. And now it's fine. It's good to finally see some awakening. Prior to now, when the Met wanted to put Black artists on stage, there were a handful of operas that they would typically cast Black artists in. And the industry as a whole, when they said, oh, we need to do something with a bunch of Black people, they would say, oh, let's do Porgy and Bess, which the Met did before the pandemic. Right. And they were planning
2019, right? 2019 or something.
2019 is when they opened the first Porgy and Bess that they had even done at the Met in, I think, 30 years. And I have so many things to say about I think I'll refrain from a little bit of it, but I will say that this is a much needed comeuppance for our industry that's happening. And I do think that the Terence Blanchard opera was planned before the pandemic. And I hope that it's the beginning of some real new things for the Met. But there are some other things that have been going down at the Met this year that have nothing to do with race, that I'm not sure what the direction and the intention of the people who are running the opera company actually is. I don't know what their intention is, and I don't know honestly what to expect. And I've already told you I'm a person who very often predicts what's going to happen. I don't know what to expect, quite honestly, out of this next thing. I know that they have their first diversity head ever at the Met, the first time ever that the Metropolitan Opera, the leading opera company in our country, has ever had a head of diversity.
That's amazing and perhaps long overdue, but it's better now than never, right? So let's go.
Better now than never. So again, I hope that it's a sign of new things to come in our business, because it's necessary. It's very necessary. And I hope honestly that the diversity expands, that Black people benefit, and also Asian people who are also extremely underrepresented in the opera business. I hope that it expands to Asian people, to Latino people, and then beyond that to people who don't necessarily fit in categories, and I hope that body size becomes another thing that is less discriminated against in our business. I hope even ability, I hope, can become a thing that is looked at in how we deal with ability in stage acting in our country, so we'll see.
Before then, so we talked a little bit. I mean, of course, there's hardly enough time or for us to really have the kind of serious conversation that I know you would like to have on this subject, but let's just take it a little bit then to the audience side. We know there's plenty of handicaps. We know there's a little bit of a comeuppance happening, which may or may not lead to something truly systemic and truly encouraging at the supply side, the performers, the directors, the scripts, whatever, la partitura. But now what about the people? You were talking about the people, you reference, Black folk, Latino folk, Asian folk. So how do we, and this is something we grapple with here. We work in a Latino theater here in the Lower East Side, but there's still, how do you increase the inclusivity off the stage, meaning on the audience, for something that's still, even though I think there's been an evolution, I certainly think it's still perceived a little bit like standoffish.
I think a few things. I think number one, and I hope that this is one lesson that the opera business took, even from doing operas like Porgy and Bess, and Fire Shop in My Bones has been done in other places. But I think first, you have to put things on stage that people from diverse backgrounds want to see. If you want diversity in your audience, you need diversity on the stage. That's the first and most simple step.
Because then people see something that they can identify.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's the first and most simple thing that anyone can do to any house, any theater, any entertainment industry or organization can do to bring a diverse audience, put diversity on the stage, and in every way that it means, having people of diverse backgrounds behind the scenes is also going to support that, because then you can put it on the stage in a way that actually resonates with that diverse audience when they come, because you can't put, diversity on the stage and then have the story still told from a white perspective. You have to have the people on the stage and then have also the perspective of diverse folks, diverse persons actually in the room, then it's the conversation that you're having with that same audience. What are you saying to that audience in your own communications? Are you saying you're welcome here? Are you saying, please join us? Are you saying we appreciate and respect you and invite you into our space? Or are you saying, stand over there, get over there? So even in the materials that you're creating as that organization, are you making sure that people are seen in the materials and that they see themselves there? And then it becomes going into the community. Because if you come into my community and you say, I want you here, come to my house, come to my dinner, and then I go around the corner and I see that you put a sign up in my community where I'm not represented, I'm less likely to want to come to your house, period. So I think it's a matter of getting a really holistic approach in your courtship of that audience that you're looking for, and thinking of it as a courtship. If you were courting someone, how would you do that? You would make them feel loved and appreciated.
In that analysis, how does Carmen, which is one of my favorite ever, how does Carmen hold up to that analysis? Do you think it's one of the more inclusive or potentially attractive to other communities, even though it's a European product and this and that? But what do you think of Carmen in that context?
I think Carmen has a very mass popular appeal. It's definitely one of the most popular operas ever written, one of the most performed operas. And it's an opera. There are certain operas that gather audience, and Carmen is one of those operas. But again, it all depends on how the story is told. Once I have you sitting there in that audience, are you going to have all of the stereotypes of Carmen and Don Jose and the Toreador? Are you going to have all of those stereotypes walking across the stage? Or are you going to tell me an interesting and unique story where I get
where you can nuance some of those stereotypes?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, and I think that's an issue with a lot of the operatic repertoire, because it can contain a lot of tropes. And it can contain a lot of, and it does, I mean, it's written from the perspective of European composers and librettists, European men specifically, for the most part. And so, yeah, how are you going to tell the story once you put it on the stage? And what are you going to make it into to sort of either eliminate those tropes or have those tropes serve a purpose beyond being
a put down or a trope or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, totally.
Exactly.
Well, then, you know,
Carmen.
I like that music. Anyway, going towards the end, because all good things must come to pass. I would like from you to our listeners, to whoever's listening, given that you are published on the subject, given that you're so invested on, you know, on the seminar, on that platform, you know, that's just not singing, but also life in the music industry and beyond. What's just a simple, you know, starting piece of advice for folks that are thinking about it, that feel, you know, they like singing, that they have an instrument, that maybe they have had some training or have had no training, or like, what would be a generous sort of starter for these folks going into, like, thinking about maybe how do I go into the music world? I want to start something or other. I don't know.
Okay. I think one of the first things I would say is identify who you want to be within the context of it. That's one of the first things I would say, to really know who you want to be and what you want out of it, and to start there with yourself.
Right.
I think that would be the first thing that I say, from a place of total openness and honesty. I think, okay, the other thing I have to say is, if in your heart, deep in your heart, you know that you really want to do this and will do the work no matter what that work is in your genre, in your field as an artist, then you absolutely must empty yourself of expectations and limitations. And
that's funny. Expectations and limitations.
And limitations. You have to empty yourself of all the expectations and limitations and open yourself to the possibility, knowing that you can have the vision and hold the vision. Things will unfold differently than you expect, and you get to go with it.
I really like the advice, because I think it holds for other art careers beyond singing. So I really, anyway, thank you, Liz. It's been a remarkable conversation.
A wonderful conversation. It's so nice to see you and chat with you.
We look forward to you coming on to Latea at some point or other again. We would be honored. And we're going to be looking for that 26th gig.
Thank you. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Well, good evening to all. Thank you. Stay on with Latea Remoto. More things are coming.
All right.
Good evening.
Miguel.